Welcome to the AI Ethics and Governance for Leaders podcast. I have an amazing serial entrepreneur here working with AI at the intersection of healthcare and usability and applicability in real world. So with that as a brief intro, I would love to open the space for Larry Cordisco and Andy Nguyen. Please, would appreciate if you guys can introduce yourself, talk about your company. Would love to see a demo if you guys have it there, and then let's engage and share with the community. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having us, Freddie. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Larry. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Neatly Health. And I spend most of my time sort of in the intersection of product and patients and partners, making sure we're building something that genuinely improves people's experiences. My background, I bring about 20 plus years of investment experience with a lot of healthcare focus on that. And I think what people learn about me very quickly as they look through my bio is a lot of the inspiration behind what we're doing at Neatly comes from my own experiences managing my wife's cancer care. She's had cancer 3 times. And so my journey there started from a whole perspective of I don't know what I don't know, which is, I think, what most patients, starting point experience is, to becoming somewhat of an expert based on my overall investing experience and unfortunately getting, 3 different times going through that experience with my wife, where I learned a ton. And toward the end of all that and tons of Dr. Google and the like, I came up with this idea that there should be an app for that, to put it simply. And the experience, though, of getting from that idea to where we are today has been a long one. And it's been something where we needed AI, which is very relevant to today. We needed AI development to make that vision a reality. But here we are. And so that's my background.
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Freddie. So as Larry mentioned, we're deep into the AI meets healthcare meets sort of patient empowerment, and I come at it more from the data informatics angle. So so I'm the Chief Technology and Science Officer for Neatly Health here, and my background's in data, AI, informatics. I did my PhD at biomedical informatics from UCSF. From there, have had leadership positions in pharma, Roche, and Genentech. Most recently was head of data and AI at Best Buy Health, before now spending all of my time here and really looking at how do we take advantage of all the data generated during the delivery of care, right? So in pharma, what we typically call real world data, and do so in a way that's patient first, right? And I think really leaning into the idea of patient centricity. We hear that term a lot across different aspects of industry, but the reality is most of the tools and solutions that we see out there are really geared towards how do we make the system more efficient, right? How do we help hospitals? How do we help physicians? And patients are just still left scrambling on their own. And so for us, really using AI to build the company, right? To run and operate the company and do the development and everything on that lens from that end. But at the same time, AI is a core part of how we deliver the patient experience and really ultimately give patients the tools that they need to successfully navigate the system and get the best care for themselves.
Excellent. Thank you guys for the intro. And by the way, just for transparency, I got involved with Larry and Andy many years ago, me as a caregiver of a cancer patient too. So this is something very close to me. I was an advisor of the company, and I do believe I still have some tiny equity in the company. So full disclosure, this is something very close to my heart, and I think it's very intentional to have them sharing all their learnings of this long journey. It's been almost over almost 10 years since they started this journey with different kind of tools. And I guess now the tools are there, which in the past, when they started, the technology wasn't there. And with generative AI and all the stuff that is in the pipeline, I think this is going to be the time for this team to really take off. So again, I just wanted to put it out there to make sure that this is clear. So can you please talk about the company, what it does, what does your app do, how does it work, who's the target audience? I mean, as we know, we all have all kind of apps that we download once, and so can you help us understand why? A, who's your client? Who's paying for this service? And why would we do it? And again, I downloaded it and I'm playing with it and it's fascinating. But again, I have a lot of apps out there, and this is what I think some of our audience are going to be wondering. So take, let me know, guys.
Okay, I'll start with the app and then I'll transition and hand off to Andy to talk about how we're going to make money off this. So Neatly is a AI health companion that's focused on the patient experience, and Andy touched on that a bit, and I think maybe we both did. It captures what really happens in the visits and turns that into simple, actionable steps for both the patients and caregivers. And what does that mean, just practically speaking? It means when you go to your doctor appointment, you pull out Neatly and you record the conversation. And what it's capturing in that conversation are all the nuances and preferences and patient needs and all the things that really drive treatment decisions between a doctor and a patient, the driving factors. Most of that does not end up in an electronic medical record. And so when a patient leaves the doctor's office, even if they're studious and taking notes, it's very hard to untangle. This is very complex information at times. It's very hard to untangle what that conversation was about and what really was driving the ultimate decision. So we record the conversation and we deliver an AI powered summary that basically breaks that conversation into a couple pieces: what you told the doctor, what the doctor told you, what are the key considerations behind what the decisions are that are being made, and what are the next steps. And it's all written at a very easy to understand level so that most people can understand it very simply. In fact, I think we write it to an 8th grade reading level. So it really breaks down to very simple reading. The other part of the app is a chat function. And it allows the patient or user, in case it's a caregiver, to basically ask any question about their health. They can go back and say, can you remind me what the doctor said about, whether or not to take this medication with food or not? Can you tell me what other medications the doctor was worried about as being counterindication or a problem with the main medication we were discussing? What are the next steps that I should consider? What are the next questions I should ask at the doctor's appointment? And where that chat really gets powerful is if the user is recording these conversations with their physician, those answers and the questions that people ask about their health become incredibly personalized and very directed and tailored to what the specific issues and questions and problems and goals that patient has around their treatment. So it's meant to be a 24/7 resource, always there. And it's meant to really leverage, not replace the doctor. It's meant to leverage the conversations and learnings that the patient gets from their doctor. Ultimately, as we scale this product, when we have a lot of users, and this is where I'll transition to Andy, we've built a backbone of, an informatics and data science backbone on this product that will basically cluster like patients into cohorts and surface insights from cohorts for everyone. So basically, everyone has an opportunity to learn best practices, best questions, what to do next from all the other people who've gone before them or are there now. And that sort of ability to leverage the crowd of the wisdom of the crowd is something that I think is something we thought was very important for this product and really provides information at scale for every user. And that's something that's very hard to find these days, when you're searching on the internet. So that's basically how the product works. And Andy will tell you how we make money.
Yeah. So, and just to add one thing to Larry's comment, to really, highlight this is at the core of the interaction here. We really want to improve that relationship
Yeah.
that patients have with their physician, right? That's a trusted resource for them. Obviously, somebody helping care for you. And the one of the primary ways that we do that is to really lean into this is what you should be asking your doctor or your provider, right? And we help you frame it in a way that pulls in all of your clinical context. It pulls in your preferences, what's important to you, what isn't, right? As you have that chat or as you have the interactions with our chat, we sort of develop that sense of your full holistic picture. And from there, it's like, this is how you want to frame the question for your physician, right? And so it's never, okay, this is what you should do. Don't worry about talking to your doctor anymore. That's not the interaction we have at all. It's okay, next time you go see Dr. Jones, this is how you want to ask that question, right? Um, and so really leaning into that. And as Larry mentioned, part of how we implement that, as well as kind of the underlying informatics here, is, within healthcare, at the core of it, I would say that we're always thinking about people as part of a cohort. Whether you're talking about evidence-based medicine, whether you're talking about precision medicine, personalized healthcare, it all really comes down to, can we reliably define a cohort to then make a decision for that cohort? Now, ideally, we get that cohort as small and narrow as possible. And so we see that in cancer, for example, a lot, right? Where, yes, you have this type of cancer, it could be breast cancer, but now we know you're triple negative or HER2 positive or whatever it might be. And then we start getting really into the nuances of, okay, you're past your second line therapy. And the more narrow we can make that cohort, the more precise the advice, the treatment decisions, the therapies that are out there. The problem is doing that at scale is extremely hard, right? And so that's pretty much where I've spent the majority of my career, is how do we do that from a provider standpoint, from an academic medical centers standpoint, from pharma perspective. And so we tend to then pull back, right? And we look at these larger cohorts. That's easier to do, but at the same time, it's less personalized. And so one of the things that we're able to do here, and what we're really leaning into, is being able to define these cohorts in a way that allows us to service both the pharma side of it as well as patients. So it's the same cohorts that we're defining, and we're able to drive more targeted insights for patients as they're interacting, and saying, patients who are in your situation at your phase of the journey, who have the exact same subtype of the disease, for example, these are the questions they're asking their physician. On the pharma perspective, and what Larry mentioned a bit about dark data, is we're really surfacing the 77% of why treatment decisions are made, and this becomes extremely valuable to pharma. So one of the things here that we like to just address head on is, this is a product that's intended to be free for patients. Anytime people have a free app, the first thought is, well, I'm the product, right? And what does that mean as a user when you're putting your health information in here? So one, we never use anybody's data for marketing or advertising. We want to be clear that you can trust what we're providing to the patient, right? That um, it's not influenced by any sort of advertising or marketing business model back behind the scenes. And at the same time, all of the data that's being made available to researchers, to industry, is always in a de-identified aggregated form. It is never individual data. And the reality is, we want to make this data available in a way where, as we leverage your data as a patient for the industry, we're doing so in a way that you actually want us to do that. It's in a way that's furthering science. It's improving our ability to treat patients. It's improving our ability to find new medications, right? And to target those medications as effectively as possible for patients. And so, the core ethos that we have on how we leverage data is that it's always for the betterment of patients and always towards furthering science, and in a de-identified, privacy preserved way.
So thank you, Andy and Larry. So actually, you're touching on a very key things for this podcast, which is, as you know, we focus on AI, ethics, and governance for leaders, non-technical. So you start touching on some of what makes you guys unique. You're talking about you guys are a native AI because you this iteration of your company. So it seems like you got rid of all the legacy that you started in the past. You kept the relationship, you kept the learnings from it, and went out with a new technology which is revolutionizing. So, so two things. Hey, can you go deeper on how you think about ethics? And you're talking about privacy there, and you're talking about the concept of not being very inclusive of your customer, your client, which is your your user in this case, which is free, which is that's amazing. The least somebody going through a cancer, as all of us who have experienced that process, the least you want is yet another expense on you. So can you touch on that? And just to add, to make it a little more complex, there is a recent announcement from OpenAI where they are going to integrate with your electronic medical records. So can you add that into your what makes you guys unique, especially within the AI ethics and governance framework?
Yes, I'm happy to take an initial stab at that. Yeah, so one, what you're going to hear here is like a sprinkling of my own personal sort of perspective on this, right? And then us as a company as well. And then I think we'll touch into the AI ethics end of it. I think especially given OpenAI's recent announcement around ChatGPT Health and all that, I think the simplest way to put it, and I'm a very sort of I try to keep things simple, right? Because the world's complex enough. And so from a first principle standpoint, we're a patient first company, right? And so we are built for patients, even though we have, obviously we have touch points back to industry and academic medical centers and how do we enable research and whatnot on that end of it. But first and foremost, we're a patient centric company. And so I think from that standpoint, and you'll see that in our messaging and how we design our product, and then ultimately here in AI ethics and governance, is what we're doing going to help patients or not, right? And I think that drives the internal conversations that we have. And we always have to be in service of patients from that angle. What's interesting though about this is Larry and I are healthcare veterans, right? And so we're coming at it as healthcare insiders, and a diverse experience on top of that. And so from there, we're bringing the knowledge that we have about healthcare, both how it's funded, right, the financial nuances behind the scenes. It's an extremely complex model. You have industry, right? You have payers, you have providers, and then you have the experience of we've worked for providers, for pharma organizations on how we use data and whatnot there. So given all of those learnings and bringing all that together, how do we now then have a tool that truly enables and empowers patients to get the care that they need? And so I think that's the fundamental sort of driving factor behind the scenes. And where that then comes out is oftentimes you'll see companies trying to build tools for patients or tools for the healthcare system, but ultimately fall into that trap of, well, in order to do this, we need to do XYZ for hospitals, for clinics, for providers. You sign a business associate agreement with the hospital, you sign a contract with the hospital, and now where does that accountability lie? The accountability lies as a company to the hospital. Right. And so that's, ultimately where things are coming from there. So for us, by going direct to consumer, we keep the accountability that we have to the patient directly, right, to the consumer. And that's a big part of it. I have a lot more thoughts on that to connect back to the AI ethics stuff. But Larry, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Well, the only thing I'll add is, and when you can think about, I mean, you can picture when you're creating a company and a business model, you consider a lot of different ways to make money. And you can obviously picture, as we're talking to investors, this, how do you make money is one of the first questions that always comes up, right? So the pressure to come up with a good financial model and business model, it's pretty extreme. And so you end up looking at everything, like what's in play. And so as Andy discussed, where we've fallen on this is basically shining a light on the dark data that happens in patient-doctor conversations. I want to be explicit, though, and as Andy was, because these things come up, these conversations. We never will ever give someone's email address because people register the product to a marketer. So whatever's in your record, you will never get an ad pushed to you that says, "Oh, I understand you have irritable bowel syndrome," or but boy, I randomly am getting irritable bowel syndrome commercials and ads all of a sudden. That will not happen because of us. Nothing, your email address will never be used. Nothing you put in the app will never ever be sold to a marketer. There is no identification that will ever go out to anybody in industry. We will not make money on Freddie Seba or any individual person ever. And so I'm going to put a hammer on that, that exclamation point on what Andy said, because I think it's massively important. And I say that because there's a lot of pressure to figure out how to make money on this, right? So I just want to reinforce that from an ethics standpoint, we really want to be patient first, or we are patient first. We put a lot of thought into that. And so everything is aggregated and de-identified, and we think we have found a very clever way to make money and keep the product free to patients and caregivers. But that tying it back is not necessarily an AI ethics question as much as an internet and privacy and data security ethics question, I think. But we have put a ton of thought into that.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. That makes a lot of sense. Putting your customer, the patient, and caregivers at the center is key. So thank you for that. So that leads us to our next question. Like the question is, why are you spending the most time these days? And I'm going to add pieces to it. Uh, and this is again, our audience is non-technical necessarily. So the first thing that people, especially with a native AI application like yours, guys, everybody thinks about hallucinations, and everybody think about biases. Is this, AI being trained on patients that don't look like me, don't talk like me, don't have my same background, and how is that relevant to me? So how do you navigate those challenges that at the end is not doing the right thing or wrong thing, as you say, because you're focusing in the customer, and if you don't create enough value, that customer is not going to use you. So is is that what you're spending your time, or how do you go about thinking, and how do you recommend leaders who are like you, cutting edge with AI applications to think about this issue?
Yeah, so I mean, that obviously I do spend a lot of my time thinking about these things, and coming from an engineering background, right? I always say that I started my professional life as an engineer, got trained as a scientist, but have the heart of an entrepreneur somewhere in there, right? Always trying to solve problems, and so that engineer in me is always like, okay, well, you got to build repeatable, reliable systems, whatever that system might be. How do you do that in an era where the thing you're asking might be slightly different the next time you ask the same question, right? And so part of the value behind generative AI is the non-deterministic nature of it, right? That's where we're seeing the immense value, because otherwise we could just write an algorithm and then do something reproducibly like we have for the last 30 years. But then at the same time, to your point, Freddie, it may hallucinate, right? And there's several different layers there that I like to just be very clear about. So there's hallucinations where something is just completely made up. And then there's bias, which may or may not look like a hallucination depending on your frame of reference and how you're looking at it. And when I think about it this way, I think about bias as something in the underlying training data that is trending a certain direction, right? So, and we've seen a lot of discussion around bias even before AI with other machine learning algorithms, where you could go to Google and you could ask a question, right? And the Google image search would bring back things that were discriminating in nature. And so part of the challenge with dealing with bias is that some bias, or what we think, like from a mathematical standpoint, the underlying aspect of bias is there's a signal there of some sort within the data set. Now, that signal may be patients who have your exact type of cancer, who also have diabetes, who also are on this other medication, tend to respond differently to a drug. Or this is the question you want to ask your physician. How do we surface that? In a sense, that is a bias, right? This is just a bias that works in our favor. At the same time, you can have bias that works against you. So a big part of that is keeping humans in the loop. And so for us, being an AI native company, where as we build the product from the ground up, right? We went from zero to where we are now using AI, also knowing that we have AI incorporated along the way. That human in the loop is a fundamental part of it. So we did spend quite a bit of time engineering a back end where we're able to then bring humans in to have them review what's coming out of the AI. So whether it's the visit summary, and other insights that are coming out of the system, to bring that lens in. Now, from an overall sort of holistic approach, it's not that we're always bringing clinicians, for example, right? So we want different types of people to be reviewing it. Every single one of us is a patient. So I think every single one of us is in a position to help validate what the AI is generating, but we're each validating something different. Right. So if Larry and I are going to look at it, we're coming with a different lens than if we have an oncologist look at those insights and say, hey, is this a good insight or not? But by building that system where we have human in the loop and we actually know who's evaluating it for what, and all of the kind of metadata that goes around that, that allows us to then keep an eye on it and really improve our eval approach over time.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So again, you guys have the advantage that you've been at it, you come from the industry, different um, perspective on it and different parts of the industry, so you can add a lot of value. So leaders, big companies that are looking at you, looking from the outside, of course, they want to think about what they do with their AI, right? And one of the things that you keep reading and is out there in the literature and the press is like look for something that is repetitive, use AI for automation and what have you. So what is your take? How do you recommend leaders of these hospitals, these pharmaceuticals that are out there looking at an application like yourself and thinking about this? Do I buy? Do I outsource? Is this something that I need to do? And how do you develop your piece? I mean, did you look at your workflows or your user experience and thought, okay, this is the way AI should work? Or can you help us navigate how to think about this?
Well, I'll start, and this is going to be a very normie sort of like, explanation because I'm not the deep tech person. But the way I'll tell you the way we approach this, and it dovetails into a little bit of what Andy was just speaking about. And I mentioned it earlier, how the goal, the way the app works is to anchor on the conversation that the doctor and the patient are having. Now, behind that conversation, and Andy touched on this earlier, you think about the complexity of someone's medical condition and the nuances of what goes on behind creating cohorts of patients. Well, what we're doing is pulling out every medical concept that's being discussed in a conversation between a doctor and a patient. And why that matters in my mind, and this is the way I think about it, and Andy's free to disagree. We disagree all the time, by the way, so it's totally great if he disagrees with this. It'll become entertaining. But the way I think about this is the way you write a prompt in ChatGPT, the more specific you write the prompt, the more focused the prompt is about what you're trying to accomplish, the better the answer you get. And I don't know if it lessens the opportunity for hallucination, but I know that when I write a very specific prompt with a very specific objective, and I'm very clear about what I want, I get a much better answer if I write something open-ended. And I guess the connection I'm making to what we do is when we pull out these medical concepts, we then are writing prompts in the background that are extremely grounded in each individual patient's record. And so this is a way that we are approaching AI to both minimize hallucinations and the like, but also tie into what you're saying is I think generically speaking, whether you're building or buying something, I think what you want to do is reduce the opportunity for variables. When I say variability, I guess is what I want to say. And so the more facts, the more specifics, the more guardrails you can put on very specific use cases, the more likely you are to get the outcome you need. And so I don't know from my perspective if build versus buy, it matters as much as it is to know if I'm buying that product, does it reduce the risk of variability? Or when I'm building a product, how do I reduce the risk of variability? And I think it's that risk of variability that really everyone's worried about. Because no one really knows how all this works, right?
So great. So let's go deeper on that. So I'm a board member or I'm a trustee of a teaching hospital, and there I learn about you guys in this podcast or somewhere, and I say, well, I have all these things that AI is trying to do. I heard we have a pilot with one of those, electronic scribes. So why would I want to bring yet another thing that kind of looks kind of sort of the same? And how do I think about more risk as suppose, I mean, mitigating risk and reducing complexities? How do I guide as a board member my leadership, the guys who are, in the trenches, how to think about this?
Yeah, I mean, there's depending on where you're going with that question, Freddie, so let me know, right? And I'm happy to reframe accordingly. Is I think there's two levels to that. There's the question of as a board member or a trustee or something, and kind of looking at that level of leadership. How do I think about AI? How do I think about the risk of AI? Where do I bring it in and whatnot? Then there's also us as a company, Neatly Health specifically. Are you asking about us specifically or kind of the AI?
Yeah, I would love to see how you operationalize all of these. How do you think? Because you're a builder. You are people who work for large corporations, both of you, and you saw and you interacted with leadership and boards and trustees, and now you find yourself kind of serving, if you will, them. Um, Granted, your customer, as I understand, and is the end user, and but they're in part of your ecosystem. So to the extent that you know how they think, or do you know how they should be thinking about risk mitigation and where to engage and where resources go, and you know making sure this doesn't become a pilot that never works, and because things are moving really quickly. That does that help on?
Yeah, so it's an interesting. I think my response is going to be it's an interesting response in the sense that my background's in medical and clinical informatics. One of the jokes years ago was that while like I have one foot on the technology side, one foot in the clinical practice and kind of understanding care delivery and whatnot there, and all the nuances around that. But we used to say that informatics is essentially using technology to solve non-technical problems. And so in this case, there's sort of the kind of splitting the two, right? Whereas if you look at most use of tech, we're solving something that we just couldn't do before, right? Because of the lack of technology in that sense. But here, so if you look at what we're doing as Neatly Health specifically, and where we can then bring value in from a pilot standpoint, from how do we work with providers and provider organizations, is we're we're very clear that we are a patient driven solution. So while we're working with clinics and medical centers to be channels for us, we're not doing deep IT integrations with the clinics, right? We're avoiding the BAs. It's not that we want to avoid the security aspect. So everything that we've built from the ground up meets all the HIPAA requirements. If we needed to sign a BA, we could from a technical standpoint. But from a business one, we don't. And the primary reason behind that is it makes it very clear we do not intend to do deep integrations with your IT systems, right? And that way we don't have to worry about that because that's where a lot of the expense starts piling up, right? Just getting all that in order. When I was at Best Buy Health, we were a remote patient monitoring hospital at home company. I own data and AI there, right? So just looking at the level of integrations there, it gets daunting very quick. And so for us, we're steering clear of that. And why? Because as a patient who brings this tool in, the patient is the one that's in the driver's seat. They're choosing to use this tool, right? They're the ones making the decision to use the tool. Now, maybe it was recommended to them by the hospital, right? Saying, hey, here's a tool that's available to you. It can help with XYZ. Uh, and the patient brings that in, uses it. Because of that, the hospital doesn't really take on any of that risk, right? Now, there is where does the risk come in? Obviously, there's a risk around accuracy, evaluation, and whatnot. So that's where we spend a lot of the time there. But when we generate an after visit summary, when we tell you these are the next steps, we're not recommending next steps to you. We're distilling the next steps that your physician had already given you, right? And so that's where we're able to help mitigate the risk at that level. And then from there, if we do want to provide insights to the provider organization, it's done just like we do with the rest of industry at a de-identified aggregated level, right? So we can tell you within your clinic all the patients who meet a certain cohort definition, right? So all of your diabetics, for example, what's the percentage of ER admissions? Those are types of insights that you could potentially get without needing to do deep IT integrations, without having to take on that burden and the risk of doing a massive pilot project only to find out that your integrations cost a lot, that you didn't get the signal that you wanted. So kind of how do you divorce those two? And by focusing on the patient, that's our approach to mitigating that.
One thing I just add generically in terms of like you're on a board or a leadership team and you're looking at this, which I think is where, I'm just going to give an example that if this works or not. But I know someone who works at a large legal department with a media company, and they've trialed one of these AI solutions to write contracts for them. and they have found it to be not an effective way so far. And they're trying to figure out why is it that we get so much variability and lack of consistency with the way this legally focused AI tool is supposed to work. And I think it comes down, this is my own hypothesis, I think it comes down to two or three factors, probably two I'm going to talk about. The one is, and this is again, the variability of the data that goes in. Like if this model's looking at all kinds of different contracts, people have written similar contracts different ways, it's going to be very hard for the AI to make a decision which way is the right way that this company wants. And so again, I'm about, and what Andy just said, we're anchored on the patient record with the doctor. We're trying to take that kind of variability out of the equation. The other variability that I think this company is dealing with this tool is the tool randomly chooses what large language model to use when they're writing, analyzing the contracts and making suggestions on what should come out next. And Andy and I have been very focused on, we did a deep evaluation, chose one tool, we continue to evaluate it, but we are comfortable with what that tool is going to output because we've trialed it and tested it, and we're talking to our users all the time, and we won't change that large language model and unless we do a full evaluation. And that's another way we take variability out. So when you think about the risk that a management team or a board should be thinking about, in my mind, it kind of comes down to those two things is the starting point to know that you're going to get a consistent, repeatable, scalable sort of process and output.
Yeah, and I
It's
think part
an,
of that too, if taking it back to that lens of the board, sort of the senior leader in an organization, executive leadership, right, is I think we all fall into that trap of seeing like this AI is cool, right? It's a shiny object. Let's go chase after it. But Larry's point about reducing variability, especially in the black box nature of it, right? Like AI, everybody talks about AI being a black box. Now, if you take a black box and you actually multiply and you have five black boxes and you don't even know which black box you're using when. So I think as a leader, just really pushing the technical teams to be very clear on why are we using this approach, right? Why that model? Why the pipeline is going that direction, not getting into the details, but mainly just making sure that your teams are actually thinking about this and they have a reason for it. And I think one thing that Larry mentioned was akin to the garbage in, garbage out problem that we heard with machine learning before, right? Data science in general. I think that only gets magnified here. And AI especially is highly, highly sensitive to the context that's coming in. So we hear the term context engineering all the time. Now, a lot of people zoom in hyper quick and say, oh, we talk about RAGs and we talk about these different technical solutions. When I think about context engineering, and especially from the perspective of executive leadership, it's really about, do we as a company even know what our context is and where that is ultimately getting fed into these AI systems? Right, two people asking the same question of a large language model may want different answers. If I'm the lawyer asking a question versus I'm the business executive asking a very similar question, I want different levels of nuance there, right? So even something like that becomes a big issue here. And I think just making sure that as a company, you actually understand your business processes, right? Kind of the bread and butter of running a company, I think applies even more than ever here, which is just having a really good administrative layer there to know what are your business processes. Do you have good knowledge management? Do you have some way to manage your master data, stuff like that? All of those things play in instead of just skipping over all of that, going straight to AI and then hoping that it's somehow going to solve everything. AI is a force multiplier. It's going to multiply whatever you put in. So if you put in, garbage, you're going to multiply garbage.
so thank you for that. That helps as a framework. So what signals should leaders and boards and trustees be looking at for value and risk whenever engaging with a company like yourself, which is an AI native application or any application for that matter?
I'll give you, I think there's probably a technical approach maybe that I'm not going to put him on the spot what I just did, that he may be able to speak to. But for me, it's about feedback loops and constantly testing the product. We constantly test this product. And we are in very close contact with a core group of early users who are constantly like the power users using this product. And so we are extremely sensitive to anything that goes off the rails. And just even in his example, like we will not give, Neatly will not give medical advice. Now, it's amazing how much information you can give a patient without actually giving medical advice. But where we really try to package it, as Andy mentioned, and I think I did, is we will give a patient a lot of information that ends up being summarized in recommended questions for their doctor and things that they should look into. If we had find, or if we do end up finding that the app goes further than that, then that's something that we want to catch in our feedback loop, as an example. Ethically, it's not where we want to be. Legally, it's not where we want to be, right? So for me, it's really, it might be a little bit labor intensive to get it right, but it's an extremely important part of the process to be very close to the user experience. And for us, you know, Andy and I each, or both of us, are always testing the product.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea about feedback loops is particularly interesting because I think as humans, we tend to like to see, okay, is this working well? How do we do more of that, right? And how do we focus in on that? Just as importantly, especially for these systems, is to look at where they're not performing well. And so whether you're looking at it from our like the lens Larry and I are, which is building a product that has AI built into it, right? And we're trying to make sure that it's got the right feedback loops in there to deliver a good patient experience that's also safe for patients, right? And safe for the system overall. But even if you're doing just another AI project as a large company, right? Or you want to bring it in kind of like Larry's example earlier with the legal documents, I think as a senior leader, you want to be very clear with your teams to have them communicate when are things not working and do we understand why, right? Because everybody's quick to show the wins, right? If you ask a team to demo something, especially to a board, hey, Freddie, you get to present to the board in a couple weeks, right? What are you going to show? You're always going to show your wins. But I think as a board, for example, or any committee for that matter, you really want to push to find out where were the losses and why did we lose and what are we doing to mitigate against that? Because that tells you then how mature is your organization to actually use AI safely. If you're only focusing on the wins and you keep zooming in on that, you have massive blind spots on where it's not going to go well for you. And the last thing you want to do is for that to come up and bite you, right? And so I think really being able to look at it from that lens is critical.
So, what do you recommend leaders? And you're touching on the final question as we get closer. So, what should the board, the leaders, ask monthly to stay ahead? Because again, most of us are not computer scientists out there, and the beauty of this technology is that everybody can use it. I believe OpenAI claims to have 800 million weekly users. So this is a technology that has escaped the labs, and everybody could use it. So what would you recommend them to ask frontline workers and workers operating the business?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'll come with I'm asking from a technical lens, but not expecting that the board ask it and like get like a detailed technical response necessarily, right? But I do think it's important to push on this, which is if you're going to go down as a board and talk to frontline folks and say, okay, where's AI in our organization? What's going on here? I think very quickly you'll get, oh, well, here's where we use AI, here are KPIs, and this was the ROI, right? And that's typically what everybody thinks the board wants to hear. I think as a board, you really want to key into, okay, you can show us the wins, right? Where AI had a massive ROI for the organization, but then really find out why do we think AI was so impactful in that use case? Like, what about AI made it successful? And why couldn't we have just hired more people or brought in a consulting firm or done any number of other solutions? Because that helps you understand, is AI actually helping? And is it going to be the best solution there? Similarly, and I think boards should really push on this, which is if you're going to come for every win you show me where we have massive ROI, come with one where we had a massive negative ROI, right? Massive failure, completely didn't work for whatever reason. And I'm not talking about technical failure where like we couldn't get the right data, but it's more of the system hallucinated or it had a really high error rate or it didn't work the way we expected it to. And again, understanding why. Was it that we gave it bad data? Was it a bad question and just not well suited to AI? But I think that will drive maturity for that would drive organizational maturity much faster than anything else.
Thank you. Larry?
I agree. What Andy just said, I really agree with. I think as humans, we learn from the opportunity, I should say, to learn from the losses is much greater than learning from the wins. And there's a tendency in general, human nature, to sweep the losses under the rug. Where here, I think if you can get them out in the sunshine, I think you can actually unlock a lot more value in the long run because we're all learning as we go here. So there's way more value in learning from the misses than from the hits, is my suspicion. And so I think Andy's dead on with that response.
So you guys are touching, and again, we're getting closer to our time. But this has been such a rich conversation. I do appreciate you guys. So you're touching, I mean, the cleanness of what you're doing is you put your user at the center. And if it's not good for the users, you guys call it cybersecurity, call it privacy, data sovereignty. If it's not good for the user, so it seems like that's your, you know, that's where you're centering your thinking. And now you're talking about humans in the loop, humans at the center. So is that the way you, I mean, if leaders are looking at these podcasts, is that the way you're thinking to recommend them to look at whatever they're doing, to think about their customers, their key stakeholders, making sure there's no negative externalities, especially as policy keeps shifting and technology keeps shifting? I mean, what's your recommendation for them to think about these engagements, including engaging a small startup like yourself that is in the process of raising money? So how do they go about thinking?
Well, that's a tough one. And I think everything you said is what they should be thinking, and I won't speak for anyone else. I think it's easier, in some ways, it's easier for us to approach this as this is where we're grounding our emphasis. The patient, the user, that person, that caregiver is the most important relationship we have because if we screw that up, we don't have anything else to build on, right? That is the foundation of what Neatly Health is. And so, in some ways, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of interesting pressures and biases and you know, factors that could sway us from that is an easier way to make money in some other way, but we won't shake from that. But it may be harder for a larger organization that has a lot of different forces, a lot of different influences, a lot of different needs and biases to coordinate and organize around one central concept. And so I think just having the awareness of institutional pull in many different directions is probably something that leaders need to be extremely aware of because there are going to be in our conversation at Neatly, there's two voices right now that drive 98% of the decision making around this. And we have advisors and people and we listen to but Andy and I are also extremely aligned on this. So it hasn't been hard for us to come up with these foundational principles. Other organizations, it's much more difficult. And I think that's just that awareness of how complex a family can be is probably a good starting point.
But it gotta come from the top, is what I'm hearing here. You guys are the board. So you guys are setting up a culture that starts at doing the right thing, not because it's what we all should be doing, but because it makes business sense, because it keeps your customers engaged, because it makes you more profitable, because it increases your partners, the data you generate to pharmacy, to the pharmas, to everybody involved in the ecosystem. That's what I'm hearing that can translate your vast experience in all the areas that you've been working.
We also think it's the right thing to do.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. I
Andy?
mean, well, it's interesting that you mentioned two things, Freddie. You said, it starts at the top and then it's about culture. So I agree with those, but and depending on what you meant by that, I feel like especially with AI tools, And so to me, AI is a tool just like any other, right? And so how you use that tool ultimately drives whatever the outcome is, right? So you can use it for good, you can use it for evil, you can use it for everything in between. But I think what's different about this particular tool compared to any other tool we've had in the past however many years here is that it's highly sensitive to the human input, right? How you ask your question, what you feed into it, where you choose to use it, and because it's so easily pervasive, right, into different parts of your life, right? And you look at how many people are using ChatGPT in different aspects. I can use it to come up with a recipe, or I can use it to write my next PowerPoint presentation, right, or whatever it might be there. That I think the culture you have as an individual, and the culture that you bring as an individual, and the culture that you have as a team directly feed into how that AI is going to perform for the organization. Now, that culture, there's two aspects to it. One, there is a top down aspect of culture where the leadership of an organization can drive culture. But also, just like anybody who's been at a larger company realizes very quickly, is that you cannot mandate culture, right? You can try to drive it, you can try to influence it, you can say, this is what we're bringing in as leaders in the organization, but the organization takes on its own culture after that. So that's a combination of who you bring in. It comes in like what KPIs do you put on the team as leadership, right? So all of these things come together to form a culture. And if you don't have a healthy culture there, or there's a mismatch between the culture and what you want to achieve, and you bring AI in, I think that's where you really want to start thinking about it and making sure, like, are we even aligned on our culture first as we bring in these tools, which are going to just magnify everything that we do, right? It's enabling us to achieve a massive amount of scale. The amount of development that Larry and I have been able to do technically on the business front, right, with marketing, with patient facing materials, all that, like we've been able to move so much faster and do so much more. But as Larry mentioned, we're very aligned, right? And we're able to do this where otherwise it becomes very chaotic very quickly because you're multiplying whatever you put in.
Excellent. I do appreciate it. Well, you guys have a couple minutes for um, closing remarks. Any message you want to get out there? I would love to have you back in a few months because you guys are moving so fast with this technology that would love to see where you are and being able to go deeper and to see how this technology is evolving in a highly regulated, uh, changing, transforming industry. So, any final thoughts?
Well, I'll just close with a pitch to try the app. How's that? And by the way, so anyone listening, this is the same thing my neighbors hear. Anybody who knows me, I'm out there saying, but it's because I truly believe it as a healthcare consumer and a caregiver and the whole like that was the motivation behind this. So I think it's just a transformative experience for how people go to the doctor. And the two things that we hear all the time from our users are they, without the burden of note taking, and with knowing that it's going to be explained to them in an easy way after and it's always there, they're much more present in their visit. And when they're asking better questions, and this is, I'd love for someone to do an academic study on this. When patients ask better questions, they get better care. The doctor leans in. And it's a very interesting human psychology thing I'd love to get more work on. But I truly do think this product is changing the conversation and the interaction between patients and doctors.
Thank you, Larry, and we'll make sure we'll add your um, uh, contact info to the podcast so people can connect with you directly. Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of a call to action, I don't, but this usually, yeah, like try the app, right? And obviously we're proud of it, and we spent a lot of time and effort going into it. I think maybe taking a step back from that, just to be a little different from Larry's thing, is AI is a tool. I think it's here. It's going to change how we interact with each other, with our systems, with the data that we have, and all that. But for me, within the healthcare context, it allows us to achieve what Larry and I have talked about quite a bit over the past however many years here, is true personalization or personalization at scale. And I think that's why we're so excited right now, where if you download the app, you try it, you'll see that it quickly zeroes in on what's important to you, what's going on with you. And then from there, that's how we can achieve the personalization that we need across, the billions of people that we have here on Earth.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate the time you spend with us. I appreciate you, sharing your thoughts, how you building this amazing application center in customers and human and doing what is right and what makes sense for the business. So looking forward following you up, and hopefully we can have you back in a few months to see what exciting things you're doing. Thank you again
Awesome.
and
Thank you
good
so
Thank
much,
luck.
you,
Freddie.
Freddie.
Bye.
Appreciate it.